searching history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
We are back for another episode, a very exciting episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming. I am one of your hosts, Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane.
And I am one of your other hosts, Sid Bolton, otherwise known as Dirk the Daring online. I'm also your gaming archaeologist on the OMG Hour. We
are going to the future today.
We are.
And we have an awesome interview for you tonight. You're probably a man who needs no introduction because you all know who he is because his game has his name in it. We have none other than American McGee of American McGee's Alice. And you are in for a treat tonight, dear listeners.
You certainly are. And, he's got one of these names that, and of course, we'll talk to him about his name, but it's one of those things where you're thinking to yourself, is this a name? Is this a company? Or, what is this name? It's very unique, and yep. And so is the man behind the name, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? He had a really great break into the gaming industry, which we'll talk about, and we'll talk about who actually gave him his break. And some of you may not realize who it was, another name that you all know. But, it was such a great time talking to American about his gaming experience, his gaming industry, and what he's been doing, but specifically about the Alice series and where it was, where it came from, and where it might be going. So it's absolutely fantastic. I had a good time. Did you see it?
I did, absolutely. And it's interesting because American has worked on some great stuff near the beginning of the popular part of three-dimensional video games where 3D gaming really sort of hit its stride. He's worked on, a couple of games that I personally have played and think are fantastic sort of in the middle of his career. And now he's working on some other stuff, and I'm just looking forward to seeing what the future holds with this guy because he's a very interesting person and very creative and just, very, very interesting to talk to.
Yeah, and one of the few guests we've had on the show that's still in the gaming industry.
Yes, absolutely, and is going strong.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, here is American McGee, well known for American McGee's Alice. American, thank you so much for being on Lost Treasures of Gaming. It is an absolute pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me on.
I think this is probably the someone who we're interviewing that's the furthest away on the other side of the world, almost, I think. Sean, is it not?
It is. I mean, you're coming live, well, sort of live, from Shanghai, China. We're speaking to the future. It's tomorrow already.
That's right. I always know what's happened in the world before anyone else in the world does.
That's right. So thank you for getting up early. I don't know if this is early for you or not, but it's 8 o'clock in the morning for you, but I appreciate you coming on. Now, American, you have you got into the gaming industry probably in a manner that most people may not know. Do you want to talk about who actually got you into the gaming industry and where you first started?
Yeah, sure. I think the story's been told quite a few times, but if your listeners want to hear it, I don't mind retelling it. The short version of it is that I was a high school dropout working as a car mechanic, and I had previously had a lot of experience with and was a hobbyist with electronics and computers, but wasn't able to pursue that, and met a neighbor, the guy that was living in the same apartment complex as me, who was coming home every day driving a Ferrari. I was coming home every day covered in grease and junk from the shop, and we became friends. We started playing video games together. That guy turned out to be John Carmack of id Software. At that time, they had released Wolfenstein, which I had been playing, and they were on the way to releasing Doom. And so when I was introduced to their company, I started playing Doom as a tester and spending a lot of time at their studio. By the time Doom was released, I was hired by John first as a QA person, part-time. Then I transitioned to full-time answering the phones, doing tech support for people who had problems with the games. And then while I was answering the phones, I would teach myself all the internal tools, and I ended up becoming a level designer. So if you look at Doom 2, Quake 2, you'll see that there's a pretty significant amount of the level content in those games that I created. So that was my big break. It just happened to move to the right place.
So were you already playing Wolfenstein when you had met him, or did you play it after you had met him because that's what he had created?
No, so I was already playing it. Actually, the funny thing was that though I was working full-time as an auto mechanic, my aspiration, my hobby was related to computers, and so I had convinced the guys who owned this shop to purchase a PC, ostensibly so that I could build an automated sort of inventory and invoicing system for them. So I was programming on my lunch break, and of course I'd play Wolfenstein on that PC as well. So I knew, of this thing called id Software. I knew of Wolfenstein, but actually the first time that I met John and the first time that I saw his license plate said ID Tech, and we thought that maybe it's a private eye, because it kind of looked like the same Ferrari that Magnum PI drove, right?
Okay.
And we had all these wild theories for who this guy was, and it took us a little while to put together the id being the same id as in the games that we were playing.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool. That was like pretty much a lucky break for you. That was awesome. And so, of course, that got you into the gaming industry. And it wasn't long after you left id that you came out with your American McGee's Alice. So how did Alice come to be? What was the inspiration behind that? What made you want to make that game?
So once I was actually fired from id, and I spent a year or so kind of bouncing around doing some random jobs in the games industry. But I eventually ended up at EA. I was actually working alongside Will Wright at Maxis before EA had acquired Maxis, though they were already very much linked together. And so I was there while The Sims was being built, and as soon as The Sims had shipped, I was sort of left in this, wasn't sure what I was doing, and so I was invited over to the main EA office, and they sat me down and said, look, you got to do something. They had me out sort of working on a number of different projects around the world, in Japan and the States. They said, you need to settle down on something, so do you want to make your own game? And, it was just a fantastic offer. And they asked me to go off and come up with some ideas. So I spent a couple weekends just sort of driving around and thinking about it, and knew that I wanted to do something that was an interpretation of something that was classical literature. I wanted to tackle some form of really engaging storytelling and presentation of art. And it was actually a song that came on. There's the Crystal Method. They have a song called Trip Like I Do. And in the introduction to that is the word wonder. I later found out that the introduction to that sampled from the movie The Dark Crystal. And so this is actually dialogue from that film. So I guess you could say that The Dark Crystal, by way of this Crystal Method song, was what triggered in my mind the idea to do a game based on Alice in Wonderland.
And I have a question. How did you manage? Obviously you had been at a high-profile developer, but you also came out of this with your name on the cover, which is pretty impressive. Most people don't get that opportunity. How did they? Was it because you've got such a unique name? Was it because they just believed in what you were doing so much, or did they ask you to do it? Or did you say, I want to put my name on the cover, or how did that come about?
Yeah, there's very few developers out there that get their name on, right? That's pretty awesome.
I think it's owing to two factors. One is that we were working with the Alice story, the Alice IP, and so EA needs to find a way to market as uniquely theirs. And what better way to do that than the second part of this, which is the fact that I've got a name that literally no one else in the world has, right? So it's sort of like they can attach a piece of unique DNA to this property that they own. And, of course, I signed over my name in relation to that property so that forevermore it's going to be that version of Alice, right? But when it happened, and I've talked about this before, I actually fought against it. It felt embarrassing to me at the time. It felt, because I worked with the team and built the game and saw how much effort they put into it. And in fact, a lot of the guys on the development team worked a lot harder on the game than I did. My big contribution was to come up with the idea and then sort of manage the process remotely from EA. So when this came up, there was obvious pushback from within the team. So I fought it. And then at some point, after I'd fought it and I thought I'd won, and I had told the team, hey, I won, they're not going to put my name on the box. And of course, this made everyone really happy. EA calls up, and this is literally, a week or two before the game is supposed to be finished and supposed to ship. They call up and say, we're printing the boxes and we're putting your name on the box. Because the legal department couldn't come up with another way to protect it in the way that they were looking to do. So as you can imagine, my then going back to these guys and having to say that to them wasn't fun. So, for me, there's always been a bit of conflict wrapped up in the fact that it occurred. At the same time, it's obviously been a mixed blessing for me. It's helped to open doors ever since then. And so, I'm not going to complain about it, but at the same time, I think people should know that it certainly wasn't me going in there and lobbying and saying I want to have my name on this. And at no point did I go and say, yeah, I deserve to have my name on this.
Yeah.
I think everybody in the games industry recognizes just, how much effort is required from, so many people, that having a name on a box is most of the time not warranted. It's definitely very unusual.
Yeah, I think Archer McLean actually copied you because, he's a British video game designer. But I just noticed, I remember, seeing his name on a few boxes and thinking, there's not too many. And like you, he has a kind of a unique name. His first name is Archer. And so it's certainly not a common name. So it's, I don't know, it's just one of those things I'd always was kind of curious about. So thank you for explaining that. And it is also great that, you do give credit where credit is due because, as you said, games, especially those kinds of games, take so many people to put together. I actually finished a game last night and I was like, well, here come the credits, and then I just said to myself, well, this is going to be about an hour because there's just so many people that make games, put games together today as opposed to obviously back when games first started. But it's just amazing how many people are required to get a game actually shipping.
So before they attached your name to it, though, was it just called simply Alice?
So they were looking at a number of different options. I think, Alice in Nightmare Land or, there were all these kind of variations on Nightmare. It was kind of what you'd expect. It was, okay, we have Alice in Wonderland. We've got Alice as the main character. What's a name that we can claim that hasn't been claimed before? Now, if you guys have ever tried to sit down and come up with a domain name, you'll know just how hard it is to find free space for a name. And around a property like Alice, as you can imagine, there's been plays and books and movies and albums and, pieces of art. It's just such a cluttered space. And so, of course, from the EA legal perspective, the biggest nightmare that they could imagine would be if they picked something like, let's say, Alice in Nightmare Land. Then there's some guy, on the other side of the world who wakes up one day and says, hey, that's my name, and then sues them, right? And so that's what they were trying to stay away from.
So Alice came out in 2000, and then it wasn't until 2011 that you were able to do Alice Madness Returns. Why the delay? What happened there? Why was it 11 years between sequels?
So the ending of Alice development was not very tidy. I guess you could say. So the team that built the game, Rogue Entertainment, they were disbanded because they were essentially yanked around by someone at EA who said, yeah, the next thing we're going to have you guys do is the console version of this game. And so they ran out, they took all the money that they had, they purchased the console development systems, and basically spent themselves out of any kind of any cash, And then the person that had said, hey, we're going to have you build the console version of this game called up and said, we changed our mind. And so there they were, no money, and, this useless console development stuff, and they went out of business. And I then went back to EA. I was pretty furious about this. Somebody there at EA then turned around and fired my creative partner, the guy who wrote the dialogue for the Alice game. And they fired him. He'd been there for, I think, 16 years or something. So I quit. I just was very frustrated with the whole situation, and I quit. And I went and worked in Hollywood for 4 years. I was doing film and music video and TV stuff. And then I moved to Hong Kong and worked on this game, Bad Day LA, which I think was voted one of the worst games of the year of that year.
Oh.
And then I moved to Shanghai, did Grimm and some other projects. And it wasn't until I was in Shanghai and had kind of built a studio from scratch and then shown that studio had the capability to tackle a AAA console title, then I went to EA and I said, hey, I'm ready to talk about doing this again. So by that time, I think all the kind of old wounds had healed. And of course, the fan base was always there. They were always asking for more. I think people at EA knew that. And so I think it just, worked out. The timing and my being here and the capability of the team, everything just kind of came together. But yeah, it took, 10 years for all that stuff to happen, which I think, it's pretty normal.
And I noticed that on Alice Madness Returns, of course, it doesn't say American McGee's Alice. You got your name off of it, other than it says an American McGee game.
Yeah, I don't really know how that went down. So my relationship with EA the second time around was a little bit more, I don't know what the right word to use, may have been antagonistic, especially when it came to the back and forth between the marketing PR teams and myself. Because I feel very highly protective of the concept of Alice and the tone and the nature of the story. And so I think towards the end of the project and when they were thinking about what they're going to call this, I wasn't involved in that conversation much. And I think that they kept my name on there as a sort of token to the sort of like a signal to the fans that, yeah, he's involved with this one. But I think that they didn't have me in the conversation because they were like, well, we're pissed with him.
Yeah.
We're not going to ask him what he wants to do with that. But you got to remember that with the Alice games, technically EA could make a game tomorrow and not include me at all, and they could still include my name on the box, as far as I understand it.
Right, because you said you had to actually sign over your name in regards to that title.
That's right. That's
yeah.
Right.
Now I have a question just about the technology behind the game. So in the first Alice, it was built with the id Tech 3 engine, and so here you are, you've been fired from id, and yet you're ending up using their engine. I don't know if it was your decision or not, or if you were part of the process, but and not to say that you had anything bad against id. I'm just curious about if it was something that you chose because you were comfortable with their technology at the time and it was the best, because of course by the time it came around to Madness Returns, you went a different way with the engine. So I was just curious as to if there was any of your input on that, or if it was just based upon what the team was used to using.
Yeah, I mean, it was primarily convenience. I think at that time also EA had a slate of licenses for the id technology. If I remember, I may have been part of that conversation when I left or was fired from id. When I came to EA, like I mentioned before, there were a number of projects that I was consulting on at EA, and quite a few of them were using the id technology. So I was fired, but I mean, I wasn't angry at the technology, right?
Right.
And at that time, the technology was what was best suited for what we were trying to do. But you got to remember that it was id technology built on top of something that had been done by a company in Dallas called Ritual, and Ritual had done the Heavy Metal Fact 2 game. And so Alice was actually, and so what they had done, what Ritual had done, was a tremendous amount of really awesome work towards in-game events, in-game cinematics, all the bits and pieces we sort of take for granted today when you work inside of an engine like Unity or inside of some of these like the Unreal Engine these days. Back in the day, I mean, the id technology didn't have that. It was a phenomenal renderer. It had a decent core game physics engine, but it didn't have all the bits and bobs that you would want to really power a story-driven game. And so that was the combo. And like I said, that team, Rogue, they were actually, when I met Rogue, it was when I started working at id, they were in the same building on the same floor as id. So Rogue and id had been working side by side, and Rogue had been working with id technology, for all those years. So it was sort of a natural, everything kind of came together naturally that we would use that team, we would use that technology, we would use that add-on from the Ritual guys to make all that come together. Because, back in the day, I mean, what Alice did in terms of storytelling and story presentation was pretty, I don't know if it was cutting edge, but I mean, it was pretty heavy lifting to get that kind of experience built in that technology.
Well, you've always said in interviews that actually being fired from id has come to be a meaningful day for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be here in China right now if I hadn't been fired from id, right? And being out here in Asia has been phenomenal for me. I mean, moving to San Francisco after I was fired from id, I thought I had some of the best 4 years of my life. I couldn't imagine having that opportunity, the opportunity to make the Alice game while I was there in San Francisco. I mean, it's sort of, I can imagine that if I had stayed at id all these years, and I know people that are still there that were there when I was fired, they've done really well for themselves financially. I'm sure that they've had a lot of fun working on the projects that they've done there. But, at the end of the day, I mean, they're still living in Dallas. And because I was born there, I always wanted to get out. I always wanted to get out into the world. And it's one of the reasons I'm in China is because I've always wanted to push further and further afield to see what the rest of the world is like. So I think at some point it wouldn't have suited me to stay there anyway.
Right.
So I don't have any negative feelings about it.
But it kind of forced you onto the path you're on now, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, I know people who they find it very difficult to make decisions for themselves to bring about change in their lives, whether it be with relationships or jobs or, whatever it is. And I think that first, being fired from id was a real wake-up call. It was a real kick in the pants that, on the one hand, it seemed really awful, but on the other hand, it opened up so many doors. Subsequent to that, I actually became quite addicted to it. So that was one of the reasons why I quit EA in the fashion that I did. Everybody thought I was insane for quitting because while all that negative stuff was going on, I have a lot of great friends at EA who were saying to me, look, you stick around. We're going to take care of you. You're going to be put on this path. And you're going to be pushed higher into the, the organization, and you're going to, so I mean, they were basically giving me a golden ticket, and my response was, I quit. I'm going to run away and go. But that sort of has become my MO, is that once things start to feel too settled or kind of boring, or I've done it, then okay, let's stop that. Let's change up and let's do something new.
Getting back to Alice Madness Returns, which is actually one of our lost treasures that we featured a while ago, so we brought it back because now we've got a chance to speak with you. I just wanted to, and for those that haven't played it, I have to say, I played the game all the way through. I finished it. I absolutely loved the game, and I have to ask you, where I realize that you were not the sole person behind the game, but there are so many, and I don't want to say this in a negative way, but there is so much messed up imagery in that game. that it's just fantastic. Like it's amazing. Like I just wonder, do these things come to you in dreams? Are you, how much of the creative input did you have on it? I realize that you were working on the story and everything, but like some of the enemies and some of the environments are just unlike anything that's in any other game. So I just kind of wondered, if you know what the source of that inspiration is for you, or where it comes from, or is it just you?
So, I mean, I think that the Alice property itself is where a lot of this stuff is lurking, and people, when they approach the project, I think it's drawn out of their subconscious, and it's not just me, it's everyone who, ends up attracted to and working on the project. So, I mean, we had such a great creative team, the art director, Ken Wong, who then went on to make Monument Valley. If you look at his standalone artwork, I mean, he does some of the most amazing surrealist, sort of weird mix of realism and surrealism, and then, the creative director was a guy, Ben Kerslake, who just in terms of, managing to combine together the art, the story, and the game design stuff, he was just on fire. I mean, he was just having so much fun and getting so much out of the project. Certainly for me, I mean, the original basis of the story and the impetus to tell the story about the child abuse, and to draw on this darker aspects of the Wonderland story. I mean, those are very deeply personal to me. They come out of my own experiences as a child. So, being able to have a place where I can express or bring back or deal with, those experiences, obviously there's going to be a lot of power there. And I think a lot of people see that when they play the games.
Yeah, in fact, just before we did this interview, I was telling a friend of mine about it. I was showing him the game, and it just happens to be, as we record this, it's available on Steam for only $5. So if that's still the case, if anyone's listening to this and hasn't tried the game, that's certainly a very inexpensive way to try it out. And just, I mean, it's certainly worth way more than $5. So I just wanted to thank you for that game experience, because it's one of those games where, I've played a lot of games in my life. I have such a huge collection of games, and I still, from time to time, relive moments of that game in my mind, even years after playing it. And there's very, very few games that I can say that about. So, from the gameplay elements to the art and the music and everything put together into a final creative package, it's pretty amazing.
Well, I appreciate that. I wish that, I don't know if I would say I wish we could take more credit, but I mean, again, this kind of goes all the way back to that moment when EA said go and make something, and it, I spent all these days sort of going round and round in circles trying to come up with something. Alice spoke because I had this thought that, wow, there's so much depth here. You could just make game after game after game after game inside of this world. So I think all of this really goes back to the source material. There's just so much there. You just open any page of the book, any chapter of the books, and you're going to get a lot of really crazy fun stuff to play with.
Yeah.
And speaking of all this different, depth to Alice, I did come across a petition to get EA to make another game, and I don't know if you are aware of it or have anything to do with it or not. I did stumble across it, and I think we can include a link to it in the show notes. But how does that make you feel? Like, obviously, you have worked on, for those that don't know, you've done some other Kickstarter projects around the Alice concept, but not another game. So I just wanted to know how what you thought about that, and whether you can really tell that the fans still want more Alice games, because I'm certainly one of them for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd like to make another one, and I know the fans would like it. And in fact, there are people at EA that would, I talk to, that would like to have more made. So I don't think it's a question of anybody's sort of lack of desire. But anytime you're talking about a company like EA, committing to spend, tens of millions of dollars to develop and market something, those conversations can take a really long time. So, on Madness Returns, I think that the conversation where I sat down and I sent off an email and I sent off some ideas to say, hey, let's make Madness Returns, from the moment that conversation really started in earnest until we had the deal done, the paper was signed, I think took 18 months. That was just the deal-making process, Took forever. So, I sort of take all this stuff like, just be patient and it'll happen when it happens.
Yeah. So what is it you're working on these days? What are you doing in Shanghai, and what can we expect anything new from you anytime soon? What is it you're working on?
Well, that's, we as a studio continue to put out stuff actually quite regularly, but if it's not Alice, then the world doesn't really seem to pay attention. So, after we finished Madness Returns, then we did a really hard pivot towards web and mobile games, specifically multiplayer online plus web and mobile. And in the time since, we've released, I'm trying to think, Big Head Bash, Crazy Fairies, Akinero Demon Hunters, The Gate, Chains of Darkness, and we just released something called Heroes of Night. So we've actually released 6 games in the last, has it been 4 or 5 years? I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, they're mobile games, they're free-to-play games, which a lot of core gamers really hate. They implement kind of Chinese monetization concepts for free-to-play inside of mobile games. They were pretty sophisticated compared to the other games in the market, just for being 3D and being multiplayer, but I think a lot of the marketplace is now catching up with that. And we have a new one that we're going to launch. It'll be our 7th of these types of games at the end of December. So we're still cranking along. We're still making a lot of games. It's just that they're not getting the same kind of press or exposure that the Alice games got.
And this is with your current company, Spicy Horse, is that right?
Yeah, Spicy Horse, we just had our 9-year anniversary in September. And, going back to what I was saying about that desire for constant change, I think if the company hasn't been going through these sort of changes, so, the first couple of years we did a PC episodic game, the second couple of years was we did the Alice games, and then recently, these last couple of years, it's been this focus on mobile web games, and there's been a lot of variety in the kind of games we've made in there. I probably would have gotten bored, but because we keep kind of going back and forth between these different platforms and genres, it's actually stayed pretty interesting, even though it's now approaching 10 years.
That's awesome. Well, congrats on that.
Thanks.
American, thank you so much for being on Lost Treasures of Gaming. It has been a pleasure speaking with you. Where can people follow you? Are you on Twitter? Can they watch what you're saying there? Or they can visit your website, obviously, at spicyhorse.com. But how about you personally? Can people follow you anywhere?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter as American McGee. I'm on Facebook as American McGee. And I have AmericanMcGee.com as my blog. Which I use from time to time. So, I mean, those 3 are probably the easiest ways to find me.
And there's some very interesting pieces on your blog, so I think people should check that out and read some of your posts. They're very informative, very interesting.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time out of your morning.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
In the future. So, what's tomorrow like? Should we expect a good day?
It's very smoggy and a little bit cold outside.
Okay.
That sounds about right.
All right.
Especially where we are.
Thanks again. We appreciate it.
Take care, American.
All right, bye-bye.
That was great. I can't tell you how I had a great time talking to American. Again, American, thank you for being on the show. It was an absolute pleasure speaking to him tonight, wasn't it?
It was, and there was a lot of interesting little tidbits of information. For example, I did not realize there was a connection between Alice and Monument Valley. I mean, these are 2 amazing games, and I had no idea. So
yeah, exactly. I didn't either. When he mentioned Monument Valley, I'm like, that is the iOS game he's talking about, right? Sure is.
Yeah, absolutely.
What a great game that was.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that how you can be maybe subconsciously or maybe it's consciously, but I know for me, like I was very much attracted to the art in the Alice games, and you can't help but be astonished by the way Monument Valley looks in both its simplicity and yet its elegance. And so,
but to know that the artist of that was also working on Madness Returns.
Well, it almost makes me want to go back and sort of take another look just to see if I see any other connections in there that I maybe didn't notice before.
Yeah. So. I think back to, he meets John Carmack at the place where he's living. I mean, of all places for him to end up, and he meets John Carmack of all people, and that's the guy that gets him into the gaming industry. What a break.
Yeah,
seriously.
I mean, if anyone's driving around in a fancy car, befriend them.
Yeah,
exactly. You just never know what their influence might be. And
you never know who they are, and if they like games, then be their friend. Well, that was a wonderful interview. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed it. It was fantastic, and I have I will admit though, Sid, that I have actually not played the Alice games. I know of them very well, but they've never been in my hand for me to play.
Well,
so I am a little bit ashamed to say that, but
maybe I'll let you borrow my copy on the Xbox then, or something like that.
Well, I'm sure I can go get a copy somewhere.
All right.
I will. This will be now that we've done this. Now that I've spoken to American himself, we've done this Lost Treasure. I have to own the game.
And also, the nice thing about getting Alice Madness Returns, as long as you get one that has an unused DLC, is that you will get a copy of the original Alice game.
Exactly.
Included in the package. So, I mean, really, what a great value.
For sure.
So make sure that if you're able to pick that up, please do so.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to Lost Treasures of Gaming. We hope you enjoyed it. Of course, don't forget to visit gaminghistory101.com every Friday, and Fred there will create a video this week. He's going to probably do a video, well, hopefully, he'll do a video for Alice Madness Returns. But he will always, we got the great partnership with Fred where he does a video of the game that we feature here, so you can go and check that out. You can check us out online on Twitter at Lost Treasures OG, and I am Zion everywhere.
And I really hope Fred enjoys playing the game. I'm sure he will. If you're looking for me, I'm at Sid Bolton on Twitter. That's Sid with a Y. And if you want to send us an email, maybe you've got some feedback or you want to send us some ideas for people we can interview or games that we should cover, please do so at losttreasuresofgaming@gmail.com. And if you want to read any of the show notes, get links to anything we might have mentioned, including American's blog, just go to omgnexus.com and you'll find everything that you need there.
All right, and be sure to check out the next episode of our mother show, the OMG Hour, for a preview of what next week's Buried Classic could be. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back again soon.
See you soon.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.